Trump as the 45th President of the United States. Hate crimes have been on the rise. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, the 10 days following the election, a total of 900 hate crimes were reported. One specific community affected by this wave is the Jewish community. The Jewish Community Center of Staten Island received 3 bomb threats during the month of February, but these threats were not isolated to the borough of Staten Island.
So my husband, who is also Jewish, his brother's daughter, so our niece, goes to a JCC in Milwaukee, and it's one of the JCC nursery schools that's been bomb threatened repeatedly over the past few months, and so that's just terrifying and so sad to me. And I think about my niece, getting pulled out of school repeatedly and what they have to tell her, and like how they have to insulate her and shield her from what's really happening. Like, this is a 4-year-old kid, and regardless of whether these actions are like actually things that people are going to act on, the fact that you are like making this threat is literally terrorizing multiple communities in America, in the US, and that's been hitting me really hard because I'll be in the middle of class and I'll look at my text phone and I'll get, or my cell phone, and I'll get a text from my brother-in-law or my sister-in-law that's like, oh, Mirit's preschool was evacuated again. And it's just like, oh my God, my heart totally sinks.
Sarah Friedland is an acclaimed documentary filmmaker and professor of film and media studies at Wagner College. Professor Friedland believes that the rise in anti-Semitism is a small part of a much larger narrative.
I think that it's a few things. First of all, I think we can't forget that, that the United States is a post-genocide, post-slavery country. And I think some would argue that, post-slavery is even a bit of a stretch. We're still very clearly living the reality of that history on a daily basis. A lot of people feel it very strongly. And so, the rise in white nationalism, we see it more. They're emboldened, but they were always there, and they've always been there. And so I think that's something that's really important to kind of to highlight. And then I also think that it is a very real thing that, white male supremacy feels threatened by, the Black president that we just had, and having had a very strong female candidate. And the fact that our demography is changing in this country, and their position of power, they see slipping away. And so I think the emboldenedness of this culture that has always existed in this country is a direct correlation to the fact that they feel like they're losing their power.
Art history professor and interim director of the Wagner College Holocaust Center, Laura Morwitz, agrees with Professor Friedland, but believes a website is playing a major role in the rise of anti-Semitism.
That there's a really strong connection between Breitbart, from whom many of Trump supporters get their news, as does Donald Trump, and that they have been, accused of, and rightly so, anti-Semitism. Sometimes it's blatant, sometimes it's indirect. So I do think there is a link between the kind of people who are speaking to some of the supporters. But the second reason, I think, is because wherever there's hatred of the other or the outsider, anti-Semitism is not far to follow. I think as soon as you start talking about the kind of discourse, sort of hyper-nationalism, anti-immigrant, that it's not a long time before anti-Semitism rears its head. It's the same, it's a story we've seen many
noticed
times before.
In her own New Jersey town that anti-Semitism has reared its head.
I live in Verona, New Jersey, and it's an interesting place because there's a lot of new people from the city, and there's, a number of progressive people, but there's also kind of group of people that grew up there. They're a little more provincial. They're people who probably have gone into Manhattan maybe a handful of times, and I think their world is small, and I think they're the kind of people who do get a lot of their news from Fox. And hopefully being in a school where most people don't think like that, I hope at some point they'll shed those beliefs. But it's they're definitely there. They are definitely there. I was surprised because I grew up in New York, and I grew up in a place where everyone kind of grew up together. There were Jewish people, there were Italian people, there were Irish people, there were African American people, and it wasn't always perfect, but I never heard an anti-Semitic remark growing up, so it was kind of shocking when my kids came home and told me some of this stuff.
Both Morawitz and Friedland have different takes on how to combat anti-Semitism and hate crimes.
I think awareness, I think diversity as much as possible. I think as parents or anybody who's responsible for taking care of small children, if they don't have diversity in their school, I think it's really important that they get it in summer camp or they get it in programs, because like I said, those stereotypes tend to evaporate when you actually get out into the real world. I think that kind of hatred really sort of ferments when you have closed doors and you allow it to sort of grow, and then you have to air it out. I think also there has to be public discussion about it. There have to be forums, whether it's about anti-Semitism, anti-immigration sentiment, racism. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. We have to have forums. We have to have places in schools, outside of schools, in the public, in the public domain where these things are put on the table and it's openly discussed. And people who feel like that can be challenged, but can also maybe learn something.
I'm kind of frustrated by this idea that dialogue is going to change things. I feel that there has to be a very purposeful, constructed shift in power, and there needs I believe very strongly in things like reparations. I believe very strongly in these kind of real actions that would change people's place in our society. And I feel like if we don't do those things, then what's going to happen is, okay, everybody, we have to get together, we have to talk, but we're not talking on a level playing field, so what's the point? So for me, there has to be systematic change that combats systems of oppression, be it gender oppression, race oppression, religious oppression. It's not about one-on-one communication, although that's important. It's about actually changing the systems that create the society.
Since the bomb threats, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and Police Commissioner Jimmy O'Neill held a press conference denouncing hate crimes in all forms at the Staten Island JCC with Jewish community leaders. Luckily, the culprit of the bomb threats to over 100 JCCs in both the United States and Europe has been caught and, surprisingly, was found in Israel. The culprit was an 18-year-old Israeli American. While the suspect's name has not been released to the public, law enforcement officials released the facts that he was rejected from the mandatory draft for the Israeli army and suffered from mental health issues. Untreated mental health issues have become a major trend in society as we see more and more cases resulting in horrible crimes. At the end of the day, the best way to fight these heinous acts is with compassion and love.